Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, out there in the Twitterverse and on the YouTubes, the Facebook, wherever it is you happen to be coming across this latest episode of Fighting the Void. I am here again with Jeff Dornick of the GK Network and various more projects than I think, honestly, we have time to go into here. And he's got another one that we're going to be talking about here. And he's also kind of following off in the spirit of last week's mega lockdown beatdown with Corona perspectives from around the country and how that's all going. Jeff also happens to be living in California, which is a corner we hadn't heard from last week. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. So Jeff, actually, first, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy our talks.
This is me too. This has got to be your third or fourth visit back now.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
It's all good. Once it gets to 3 or 4, I kind of stop counting.
Yeah.
It's like, whatever, you're just a regular. Yeah. So which one do you want to talk about first? Do you want to get into the Corona or do you want to get into the your American Conservative Movement project?
Let's go Corona. Let's start out with the craziness and then we'll go into the solution.
Okay, we'll get good and fired up before we
There we go.
Okay, so we were just talking a little bit before we went live about this situation over there in Orange County where you're at. And in general, just the whole situation in California is, while some of the rules in some of the places are better than others, it's still crazy. I remember early on, you shared a video on Twitter of a helicopter in LA telling the citizens to get out of the park so that they can properly socially distance, I don't know, from the trees. And that was one of the scariest things, honestly, that I'd seen thus far. And it's just gotten more interesting since then. So, Jeff, you're on the ground perspective of what life is like in the lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those crazy things where, I mean, it started out with like San Francisco and LA. Obviously, we're going over the top. I mean, it's like, what do you expect, right? And then Gavin Newsom comes in and he takes it like that much further. I mean, He's from San Francisco, so of course he's got that mentality and that mindset and that sort of thing. But I mean, like literally, when I saw that video of that helicopter, I'm like, okay, this is like a whole different ball game. Like we're literally, we're in like an apocalyptic movie where it's supposed to take place 50, 100 years in the future. But it's like, no, it's happening right now. I've seen advertising or articles about how our government and police are using drones to check and make sure that you're social distancing. I believe that it can also tell if you have a fever. So that way they can report back to the government and let you know.
That sort of thing being talked about. Is that like official that they can temperature check you remotely yet, or is that just something they're working on?
Supposedly it's already in use. I don't know what departments or which states are using it, but from what I've read, that technology is already available. Awesome. I mean, even up in Huntington Beach, they were literally going in with tractors. I believe it was Huntington. They were going in and filling in skate parks so that way
I read
kids
about that. Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, number one, let's even forget like this is like complete tyranny and authoritarianism and just like completely going over the top. But like
petty,
you're taking a tractor and filling in a hole for a skate park with sand. Couldn't you just put up like a fence? Like just practically speaking, couldn't you just do that?
Right. Yeah. It's like, this is not, it's just so petty.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to take away your fun. Lest you pass the Rona while you're skating by somebody.
Yeah. But like even like beyond that, like when you get into some of these like way more progressive cities like San Francisco and LA and things like that, like literally you have your local governments that are encouraging you to rat out your friends who may not be practicing the proper social distancing. Like
snitches get rewards, as Mr. Garcetti said.
Yeah, like literally, I believe it was Garcetti that was saying, if you're out and you see somebody else out, go confront them and then report them. And I'm like, well, number one, if you're out and somebody else is out, I mean, wouldn't that mean that you're both in the wrong? Like that logic didn't even make sense to me.
I preaching to the choir here, man, because I love all of these people protesting, people being outside by going outside. I'm like, you first.
Exactly.
It's like, lead by example. Come on, get your butt back inside. Kind of like all the, it's kind of my, response to all the people who get on us about population control and everything, and stop having kids is bad. You know what? You think there's too many people? Please lead by example. There's some traffic out there. Please play in it. It doesn't work now. There's not as much traffic, maybe, but
it only works when it's other people. It never works when it's you.
Exactly. As one blogger I used to follow a lot, Mark Shea, put it, just enough of me, way too many of you.
Pretty much.
But so it's interesting over there. I want to just give a little shout out to the creative individuals who basically gave a giant middle finger to the people at that beach who filled in the skate parks and took their shovels and their beach chairs and turned it into a dirt bike track instead. I'm like, you know what? You guys are Americans. I don't know what your position is on anything else, but you've got some American spirit right there, and I appreciate that.
Exactly. That's the thing that I don't think that these government officials like actually understand is like what they're trying to do is they're trying to take away the American spirit. They're trying to oppress you to where you're just going to be like, you know what? I'm not going to fight back. I'm just going to go along with what you're saying. And I think that they're underestimating, especially, even here in California, this is progressive California. And you've still got, like you were saying, like people that are, turning that sand into like a dirt bike path. Mm-hmm. It's literally like one of those things where it's like they're underestimating, even among the liberals, how American we actually are.
Well, they had, protests in San Diego when they said it's like, we're shutting down the trails because of all the social distancing you're not doing when you're hiking on the trail.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, really?
And see, like the thing is that like they keep citing all these stupid studies where they're literally taking something out of context, and so like they mentioned that like the 6 foot rule, and so there's like so then they say, well, if you're on a path and you're crossing the path with somebody, then that means that you're going to be within 6 feet, so that's we got to shut it down. Right. But when you actually start looking at the studies, that's talking about primarily when you're inside. Or if you're standing there for a long period of time next to somebody, if you're outside, not just passing them along the pathway. Mm-hmm. And they actually say like being outside, especially now, it's definitely warmer out here in California and that sort of thing. It's actually healthier for you and better for you and can actually kill coronavirus by being outside above 74 degrees.
Which, was something they did start saying early on that, the heat and the humidity and everything should kill this thing fairly quickly. So it's like, just hang in there all summer. So it's like, wait a minute, hold on here. So heat and humidity kills it. So what you're saying is the worst thing I could possibly be doing is sitting inside a nice climate controlled environment where it's constantly dry and like 70 degrees tops.
Yep. It's
like that's what you're telling me? Or at the very least, if you're smart, what you should be telling me is turn off the dehumidifier. Not that anyone's running one in the winter in the United States anyway, but to turn that off, maybe turn on a humidifier and crank up the thermostat to like a solid 80 and maybe sweat a little bit for a couple of weeks, and you won't have anything to worry about if they were actually giving guidelines that were consistent and intelligent. Now, you kind of hit on the fact that there is a little bit of American spirit that's still out there and is starting to bubble up. Now, you didn't see it right away. For the most part, people were going, okay, fine, we'll play along. And I think that was mostly because Americans, while we have a big giant heaping pile of shut up, I'll do what I want in us, we also have a lot of, if there's a good reason, I'll do some stuff that I don't necessarily like.
Yeah.
However, and initially it seemed to a lot of people, myself included at the very beginning, that, there's some reason, there's some potential for concern here. It ain't the Black Plague, but it's not the flu either. So we don't know exactly what's going on. So, okay, I don't like it. It seems a little much, but now as more and more data has come out, and especially as rules, as the data comes out that this thing is not that serious, the rules in many cases have gotten stricter. And I think that's what's really pissing a lot of people off.
Yeah, well, and dealing with that, I think, we heard Gavin Newsom out here in California saying that he was going to use this coronavirus as an opportunity to make California even more progressive.
Yeah,
I don't know how you get more progressive, than California, but he's talking about like a new way of doing government, a new way of doing society here in what he referred to as the nation state of California.
Yeah. I didn't dig into that, but I do remember hearing about it.
Yeah, and so like literally, we're seeing them hijack this crisis in an attempt to take us even further and further to the left, further and further into progressive ideology. When in all reality, one of the main reasons why we're having such a big problem is because of progressive ideology and because of cramming so many people into very small areas like New York, LA, San Francisco, where you're literally living on top of each other. From I've heard some people say, and this is just a theory, that it's still spreading pretty consistently in those places and in those cities, primarily because people live on top of each other. A lot of them share the same vents. A lot of them share the same air conditioning units. So actually being at home could be the worst thing in the world for you. And never leaving.
One of my guests last week was Declan Finn, a guy he lives in New York. And he was talking about how, they shut down a lot of the traffic and everything on the roads, but the subways were still running. So you're still, you're still piled in right next to each other like sardines in a can in the climate controlled, sunlight free subway. They literally herded you into the worst possible place. Now, it's fine. Maybe they didn't realize just how much worse it was. Fine. But even so, if you're going to lock a place down, for crying out loud, lock down the stupid subways or say essential workers only, which I don't know if anybody has noticed, but there's a lot more people that are essential just to keep basic society running than what you thought.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then it really comes down to what's essential and what's not essential.
Right.
I mean,
I completely agree with that.
There's a major great. I understand saying, okay, hair salons not essential, maybe, but then or like nail studios, great, not essential. But then at the same time, then you start dealing with like it's still a level of health and bacteria can grow. Like if you really want to get into the nitty gritty kind of things, it's like there's a lot more essential stuff that's out there that's perceived as non-essential than we're acknowledging, I think, with all of this. But then also too, we're seeing like farms shutting down. We're seeing food plants shutting down. Like that's essential. I mean, we're going to run out of food here pretty soon. I mean, like this is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now I've seen a lot of reports over the last week or so of all the various meat packing plants shutting down because all of a sudden they've got piles and piles of corona cases, which I find interesting. They're shutting down. I've seen reports of just vast amounts of perishable goods getting dumped out because they're not getting distributed.
Right.
Which I'm not entirely sure what the reason for that is. I'm sure there are. I'm sure it has a lot to do with the lockdowns, but
I've been in and around like the food industry a little bit off and on.
Okay, great.
And so what I believe, again, this is just my perception from being around a lot of this and seeing this.
Okay, please.
So like a lot of these companies, I believe Tyson was one of the big food packing companies that's shutting down plants. There's some other ones that are out there as well. A lot of these companies are actually working directly with China. And so what they do is even if the food says made in the USA, a lot of times with these big major corporations, they're still shipping up there. So what they're doing is they're growing the meat or the plant or the whatever it is here in the US. So that way they can say made in the USA. Right. They ship it to China to cut up, package, all that kind of stuff. And then they ship it back here to the United States to sell. They don't tell you about that middle part that's actually it's spending a month in China as they're processing it and packaging it and all that kind of stuff. And then they ship it back here and then you're eating this made in USA type food. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that in a lot of these major corporation manufacturing plants for like food, especially food processing, they hire a lot of illegal immigrants and they have a lot of people here that are going back and forth directly to China, again, because they're multinational corporations and that sort of thing. So more than likely what you've got is you got somebody traveling back and forth between China and here, China and here. all it takes is one person to come over that's going back and forth between China here in the USA, and all of a sudden you have an outbreak. That's more than likely what's happening.
Yeah. Now, do you have any insight on like why like tons of milk are getting like dumped out on the ground, or vegetables just aren't getting shipped? I don't. I'm sure it's a ripple effect that makes sense to people who have the knowledge of the supply chain. I don't.
More than likely, it's because all the restaurants are shut down. So the problem becomes is you would think, okay, so just redirect it to the stores. The problem is that you have this entire chain, right? So you've got the retail store, you've got the distributor's buying for a particular set of farmers, and that sort of thing, right? So if you have a farm that's completely dedicated, let's say 75, 80, 90% to restaurant business, which most, let's say, meat companies are and dairy companies are, then you take that away, all of a sudden they don't have a distributorship. They'd have to work out a contract, negotiate a deal, like all that kind of stuff. And that's going to take too long when you're in an emergency like this. And so it's actually more cost effective for them to just dump the stuff. And I had a friend that's in Iowa that was saying that they're actually euthanizing cows right now and pigs, because what's happening is that they can't sell that, because let's say meat, the majority of the meat that's manufactured goes to restaurants, because that's going to be steaks. That's going to be the stuff that Americans are eating is the leftover stuff. It's the processed stuff that they're funneling into your frozen meal that you're going to throw in the microwave, kind of a thing, right? So that you're getting all the scraps, right?
Right.
So what happens is when you have a cow, right? I'm just throwing a random number out there. Let's say that the meat is only going to be good until the cow is 3 years old. After 3 years old, you can no longer sell the meat, because the meat will no longer be taste the same. It'll no longer have the same nutrients and like all that kind of stuff. So there's like a certain window when you can actually slaughter a cow. So what's happening is now they've got all these cows that they can't slaughter because there's nobody to buy it, but they're getting too old because so you can't they'll never be able to sell it. So it's actually more cost effective for them to just kill the cow and let it die and do nothing with it than it is to actually continue to pay to feed it and raise it and take care of it, because you're never going to be able to sell it.
So unless this situation starts to correct itself soon, presumably this is going to have further effects upstream, where they won't be breeding as many cows.
Yep.
So then obviously they don't have to spend the effort to raise them and then just to slaughter X number, which means that once things do start getting rolling again, which they are in some places, but if in order for things to hit full speed again, they're going to have to then start breeding more cows again and spend the time to raise them and get them old enough so that they can slaughter them, which somewhere they're going to have to hire the workers that they've been laying off. And so it's going to take some time for for us to really feel the full effects of what we're doing. Basically, which fits with what I was saying to, I can't remember who the other day, that they kicked over the apple cart, but they kicked it up. The apple cart was up a hill.
Yeah.
The apples haven't rolled down to us yet. Not really. But they're coming.
Yeah.
One way or another.
Yeah. And see,
apples are coming.
And see, like, that's the thing that it's like they're not taking into consideration right now when the government's making a lot of these decisions, is that you can't just pause an economy and act like, okay, everything's gonna be hunky dory as soon as we open back up. Like, literally, you have companies like we've been notified about multiple companies that we like to buy products from that are going out of business, and a lot of it is primarily because you can only go so long of spending money and shelling out money to keep your business open and not bring anything in return, right? And so it's like, so let's say we're going to go through, let's say 3 months of a lockdown, right? A company, that means that's 3 months of rent that company is going to have to pay for, even if it's deferred rent and they're going to allow you to pay it back later. You still got to come up with 3 months worth of rent at some point, right? So that's an extra expense. You're still going to have to hopefully be paying your employees to keep them there, paying their insurance, paying like all this kind of stuff, like. And then on top of that, let's say you're dealing with these meat manufacturing plants. All of a sudden now you're gonna have to start spending more money to buy more cows or buy more calves to raise them. And then it's like, that's more money where you're not getting a return. There's just going to be this long ripple effect of waiting for the return even after we get out of this lockdown.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Which actually that relates to a brief exchange I was having with Ian Miles Chung, however you pronounce his last name, I don't know. Apologies, because I'm sure I messed it up. Was talking about the restaurants, as a matter of fact, and he was like, "Well, you can't. They won't make any money if they're only at 29% capacity and everything. They're not making any money now, genius."
Yeah,
and it's like, well, I mean, they have more overhead if they're actually operating. I'm like, no. They still have to pay taxes. They still have to pay rent. They probably still have to pay some small amount of electricity just to keep the lights on, because that's still cheap security, so that people aren't rummaging around stealing your stuff. Depending on the climate that they're in, they probably have to pay for some sort of basic climate control just to keep mold from growing inside the restaurant. And again, some of them might be being really, really good guys and trying to pay their employees a little bit through all of this. In fact, my daughter, she works at a restaurant, and I think they're still paying them a little bit, but they did commit to, at least like for the first month of lockdowns, to pay them like an average of what they would typically make in a week, which I thought was really cool. It's like, good for you guys. I appreciate that. Not so much for my daughter's sake, because she's 16. She didn't need the money, and she missed her chance at getting her road test and her license because of the COVID. Mm-hmm. So I was like, dang it. But so she doesn't even have to pay for gas for a car yet. But in any case, it's, good for them, but that money runs out eventually.
Yeah, there's only so much money that we can expect these business owners to shell out, and then still be able to come back and actually have a business. And that goes for large businesses too. Like a lot of people are like, oh, that big corporation, they've got lots of money. Great, they may have lots of money. Yeah, but there's still a major repercussion if they're having to shell out money. Mm-hmm. Because let's take like a big multinational chain. Let's say they got hundreds and hundreds of stores. That's hundreds and hundreds of possibly, like, you're probably getting into like 50,000, 100,000 employees. Mm-hmm. Like that's a lot of money for no return.
Yep, exactly. And it's also, while a given company may be worth however many hundreds of millions of dollars, that's not that 500 million that Applebee's might be worth. Isn't a giant pile of cash just sitting there. It's the worth when you take in all the property, all the the land, the building, all the materials they used to cook, all those assets, investments that they're probably tied up in. It's not just a pile of cash that they can go into and raid anytime they bloody well please. That's not how this works.
And also incorporated into that is going to be assumed income, right? So if you have no income coming, so like basically like what a lot of these businesses are only running on like a certain percentage of profit margins, right?
Yeah, and it's typically a fairly narrow profit margin. They make so much money because of the sheer volume.
Yeah, and that's the thing we have to remember is like let's say you're running a restaurant, your profit margin may be 10%. It may be 5%. It may be something very small, but so you have to sell a lot of lunches and dinners in order to make your profit margin that you can take home, right?
Yeah, just to make you've got to have a lot of revenue just to make payroll.
Exactly. And so you take out all of that income. Now you're essentially still having to pay essentially that 95% of your expenses with zero income, and then also you're shelling in. Now you're having to cut into your savings, probably cut into there's only so long that you can run on having to pay those crazy high expenses.
Yeah.
I
completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. It's absolutely insane.
Now I'm curious to get back down to just to where you are, kind of the ground level, is as things have kind of moved along here, in the last few days, have things loosened up a little bit where you're at, or no? Or are they remaining basically the same?
It's remaining basically the same in all reality. Nothing's changing. In all reality, I don't foresee anything changing as long as Newsom's in charge, in my opinion.
Gotcha.
I mean,
he's made noises about working to reopen and everything in the national news, but there's nothing concrete that's actually happening.
Yeah, it's talk, and I think a lot of it probably is to continue to get federal help, because he probably knows that if he says, well, screw you, President Trump, we're not going to reopen, Trump's gonna be like, yeah, well, screw you right back, and I'm not going to give you anything. So he's got to kind of play that game a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Now, as far as you mentioned that there have been a lot of police drones and everything, circling around, encouraging people to social distance and all of that nonsense. Beyond silly petty things like filling in skate parks with sand, has there been actual enforcement?
Honestly, down here in Orange County, not so much. I mean, like one of the things that that they've actually been having a problem with, and they don't really know how to handle, is everybody's still going to the beach. Because I was just seeing that, yeah. But here's the thing: is that on one hand, they tell you go outside and exercise. You're allowed to go out and walk around. So then the question is, so why can't I go to the beach as long as I'm staying 6 feet away from somebody?
Right.
Like, what's the difference? Yeah. And then it comes into like essential, non-essential. Like, who decides? Like if you want to get down to technicality, right?
Yep.
Are they going to enforce you're only allowed to go out and walk? You're not allowed to sit and take a sit, right? And they'll be like, well, you could sit and you could take a break halfway through your walk. Okay, well, how long am I allowed to sit? 5 minutes? Right. 10 minutes? Right. Are you going to let me sit for an hour?
Are you going to monitor me with a drone to make sure I'm halfway through my walk?
Yeah, and then now what you have to do is you have to get into a technicality of how many minutes are you allowed to sit. And then you're going to get some wise guy that'll be like, okay, so I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to sit for my maximum of 10 minutes that you're going to allow me to sit. I'll get up and move 10 feet down the road and I'll sit another 10 minutes. Like, this is the problem with this is it's so over the top, makes absolutely no sense. There's no consistency. Yep, and then we're supposed to just trust that the government knows what they're doing. And that's the problem with all this.
Yep. And it's been abundantly clear that they don't.
Yeah.
They really don't know at all what they're doing. And as far as you mentioned people are still going to the beach. So I imagine that there is still a reasonable amount of traffic on the road and everything between that and people going and doing the things that are deemed essential, like going to the grocery store to get food, as long as they stay 6 feet apart from people. And
as we're all standing outside waiting in lines, because they only allow 30 people inside of a grocery store at a time. So then you have to stand outside waiting in line, spread out 6 feet apart, each person in line that's wrapped around this. It's
a little crazy. Yeah, I haven't had any real issues with that sort of thing, fortunately, except one. There's basically a hunting and outdoor sports store in the area that I stopped by, and they were doing that. They were limiting the amount of people in the store, and there was a waiting list and everything. And I was like, I was just going to look anyway. It's no, I'm out of here. I was actually on my way back from the Lansing protest on the 15th, and I, stopped by, and I'm like, looked at my dad, and I'm like, you really need to go in? No, I don't need to go in. Yeah. It's like, yeah, we'll catch it another time.
Right.
But in any case, now, okay, so there's still people driving around. There's people that are definitely wanting to buck the trends. They're getting a lot of businesses saying thou shalt not come in unless you're wearing a mask? Are you getting that sort of thing?
I mean, I think in in LA County, it's set up to where you are required to wear a mask even if you go into an essential business. So that's one of those rules. And then I believe, if I remember correctly,
our business is actually enforcing it.
I don't know. Yeah. But technically, I think you're also supposed to wear gloves. So
that is the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah.
For crying out loud, people. The gloves touch the same things as your hands.
Yeah. Well, and then you've got all the stores. I think they required all the stores to have plexiglass installed.
Right. Yeah.
To separate. And so there's a lot of precautions that they're taking. But it's like they're making life so difficult to actually continue, even for the essential businesses. And I know in some states they're even they're even telling essential businesses you're only allowed to sell certain products that are deemed essential. So now it's not only just essential stores and non-essential stores, but now it's essential products and unessential products. And I know and they're having a problem with that in Michigan, where
Yeah. It was
certain
interesting. I'll let you finish what you're saying, and then I'll actually go into that just briefly.
Yeah, well, and I think that I know that there's been a lot of talk of that kind of thing happening here too, because again, I think here everybody always looks for like the technicality to get around everything, right? So they're like, okay, so I'll just go to Walmart. So everybody congregates at Walmart, or everybody congregates at Target, and they're like, I can just go get anything that I want here, and then it's totally fine.
Well, that's exactly what happened. Pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. So I think that again, the problem with this is that we have the government that's picking and choosing what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. There's no consistency. There's no anything, and it's like, number one, when did America become this? Like that's the crazy thing. Is like that's this is what
be something for the historians to puzzle over and debate for a long time. Is what was really the turning point? Because this right here is just the visible manifestation of something that had already been boiling for a while. This isn't the turning point. This is just how we're all aware. Now it's pretty undeniable that there was a turning point at somewhere down the line. Something fundamental in the country changed. Now, the real historical debate, like I said, is going to be what and when was that exactly?
Yeah.
It's going to be these are going to be interesting conversations we have in the next few years and frankly decades, assuming frankly that there's a country that lasts that long, because my confidence has never been lower that there's still going to be even anything called the United States of America in 10 years time. Not just an America that we recognize, but something that's actually called that. I don't know at this point in time. It's just crazy. And as far as the America that we recognize, this ain't the America we recognize. A year ago, I wouldn't have been surprised if somebody told me this sort of thing was going to happen, because I could see the trajectory that we're on. If somebody had told me that we're going to just flip a switch and it's going to happen in a matter of days, essentially, a couple of weeks, we go from, hey, there's this thing that's scaring people over on the other side of the world, to suddenly you're not sure if you can buy seeds, by decree of the government. I wouldn't have expected that was going to happen quite so quickly.
Yeah.
And I would have expected it would have taken a little bit more force to get us there. As it turns out, it just takes us being scared. Now, real quickly, you mentioned the various odd and nonsensical restrictions that Governor Umbridge decided to levy upon the state of Michigan. For those who don't know, that's a reference to Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter. If you've ever seen any of the movies that character is in, which I've seen about 5 minutes, it fits beautifully. Just, she's a villain, obviously. Let's just say it fits so well. Anyway, Governor Whitmer, so to not confuse the people at home, she put on a whole bunch of restrictions that confused the heck out of a lot of people. And I think initially, yes, they included even shutting down basic local farm supply stores so they couldn't sell seeds. Now, that never actually made it into effect, because everybody said, whoa, slow your roll there, lady. Are you crazy? Do you want the farms to not make the food that you eat at whatever, progressive vegan salad bar restaurant you go to? I don't know. The lettuce comes from somewhere. It's not all grown in the lab yet. So that quickly got backed off. It quickly just became, garden centers and stores like Walmart and Lowe's and that sort of thing. So, okay, that's still stupid. For one, I think there was not every store necessarily went along with it. And I noticed that at least some of the Walmarts and Menards kind of moved their seeds out of the garden center. It's like, it was just not in there. So yeah, technicality. So a lot of people found a way. And also like Menards, like, well, you can't go over there, like right there to that aisle that's right there to buy that bag of of garden soil. but if you order it online, we'll bring it out to your car.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know if that was specifically allowed or if that was just a workaround they found. Either way. So if it was specifically allowed, it's one of those things like, well, then what's the point of this? I'm still going to the store. I'm still interacting with people. In fact, you've involved an extra person in the transaction, you know, and I'm probably still going to go inside for something else that I was going to get anyway.
Yeah. Well, and why would you want to have somebody else go handle and pick out all the products from the store when you could just go do it yourself?
Exactly. You know, Jim working in the garden center, he might have the COVID and he might give it to me on my pack of Pro Mix. I don't know.
Yep.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But it's extremely nonsensical. And then there were all kinds of things with the boating, like, well, you can go so long as there's not a motor on it. And it's like, but if you have a sailboat with a motor on it, you can use the sailboat's motor to go out to where, you know, the sails will pick up some wind. It's like, oh my gosh, just stop. Just stop trying to be smart. It's not working for you.
Yeah.
You know, but in any case, most of that got rolled back now with her latest magical, I now have the power to, and this is something we were talking about before we went live. Before the initial lockdown was, I declare an emergency and we're locked down, which is in accord with Michigan law. But that only lasts for 28 days. After 28 days, she had to get an extension from the legislature, which she did, which was a mistake. But legislators, I'm watching you. Anyway, she got that because it was necessary according to Michigan law. But now all of a sudden, to get another extension, she just has to decree it again. Somebody needs to explain that one to me. I'm pretty sure it was like, well, I use my authority to give myself more authority.
Right.
Emergency powers are funny that way, aren't they?
Well, yeah. Well, and see, like this is the thing, and this is what, you know, like I said to you before we went live, is there is something called the U.S. Constitution. There's also state constitutions that are out there, right? And
one would think, yes.
And in this Constitution is supposed to be essentially, and this is the way I always describe it, the laws that all laws have to follow, right? And so it puts certain restrictions on the government and protects certain rights for us.
Right.
Which amendment was it that provided an exception if there's a state of emergency?
Yeah, exactly. It was, wait a minute, let me. Oh, none of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where we get into, and I've had this conversation with like a lot of people, right? Where a lot of these guidelines, I think we should follow. I follow them. I wear a mask whenever I leave. I take all the precautions. Like literally, I go out, I come home, I throw my clothes in the laundry, I go take a shower. Like I take all the precautions because it's like I want to make sure I'm staying safe. I'm protecting my wife, protecting other people we may come into contact with. It's what we do as Americans. We maybe we sacrifice on our own, right?
Right.
But these
give me a good reason to do something, and I'll probably do it.
Yeah, and so that's where the government, in my opinion, when it comes to this, their role should be give us guidance, tell us here's how we beat this thing. Now here, follow these instructions, right?
Yeah.
But the question then becomes, does the government have the authority to enforce those guidelines? And we know for a fact the federal government does not, and technically the state government doesn't have the authority to overrule constitutional law and the constitutional amendments and the rights. Like a state isn't supposed to be allowed to take away freedom of speech, the right to peaceably assemble, like all of these things. So where are they getting this authority except the fact that we're just rolling over and saying, take it?
Well, again, referencing our conversation before the show, in reference to the Constitution and power in general, it only has as much power as what the people collectively allow it to have. You know, the king is only the king so long as everybody agrees that the king is the king.
Which is how we got America.
Exactly. As soon as enough people decide, you know what? I don't think you're the king. Guess what? That king ain't the king anymore.
Very true.
Regardless of what he thinks, or, you know, the governor or the Constitution, whatever. It requires, again, honestly, that goes right back to comments that we're all familiar with from the founding, is that the Constitution only works for a religious people, which, to extrapolate it out, you've got to have a common set of values, a common morality, a common sense of principles that everyone more or less agrees upon. We all agree where the boundaries are. Exactly what happens within those boundaries, there can be debates, but we all have a pretty good, solid understanding of where the boundaries are. Without that, the kind of society we have just it can't work. And really, the kind of society no kind of society can work if the majority of the people in there, and frankly, I would say the vast majority, because as we all know, a small minority can make a large difference. There were these 12 guys running around Israel back in the day that would,
I've heard of them,
that would back that up. Yeah. And so I think this is very much a time for, people who do still share those same basic sets of principles and everything that the founders were talking about, to actually remind our leaders and everything that you're not the leader unless we decide you are.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and kind of going along with what you were saying right here too, is that I think a common principle that the founders saw with having a religious people, and that's maybe not even saying specifically Christian, but just religious, right? Is that for the majority of religions, there is a source of truth that they believe is true, right? And so they always go back to either that book or those writings or something, and they understand the principle of there is at least objective truth. We can disagree on what that is, but there's something. And so by having that belief system, as Americans, we can all agree that we have a common, in the sense of the Constitution, here's rights that are provided to everybody. America was unified around those rights that we were given to us by God, right? So the fact that we now have a very atheistic society that's very anti-God, anti-religion, anti any let's say religious text of any kind, now all of a sudden there's no rules. If you just believe we're animals, there's no God, there's no truth, there's no true morality. It's just whatever's right in your own eyes. At a certain point, you're just like, what's the point of having the law? What's the point of the Constitution if I'm just an animal that can just go around and do what I want? Like that's the problem with the society we're in right now.
And that's when you get the government, cropping up with all of its various tyrannies, large and small, to enforce not the big rules, but the small rules, which, as Chesterton once pointed out, when you abandon the big rules, you don't get freedom. You don't even get anarchy. You get the small rules.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That was brilliant. For anyone out there, if you haven't read Chesterton, by golly, what is wrong with you? Start reading him yesterday and get back to me, and you'll see that this chubby English journalist 100 years ago basically effectively predicted everything that we're going through now.
Yeah.
Like, he just saw it. Of course, to be fair, England was a little farther down the road than us. So we only saw 50 years into the future. So,
right. That's fair.
But, that's all. Anyway, now that, I think we're going to probably run a little long tonight, Jeff, because I want to give you a chance to talk about your new project, the American Conservative Movement. But first, I kind of want to take a step back. And what's your perception overall of just the virus in and of itself? How serious it is or isn't? And have your thoughts on that evolved over the last couple of months?
Well, I feel like ever since the beginning, I've always felt that it's been overblown. From that end, I don't think that I necessarily have changed my mind on that. But granted, I think what I feel like I have been learning and kind of growing along with is that, it is easily contracted. It's easily shared. And that's one of the things that I feel like science has shown, especially when we're starting to see a lot of these antibody tests and more people have actually had it, right? So obviously it's very contagious. And I think that that's the danger, is that in that sense, a lot of people are going to die because of this thing, but just because everybody is pretty much either has had it or is pretty much going to have it here pretty soon, right? But when you're talking like percentages, it's not nearly as crazy as what they were telling us in the beginning. It's like literally like percentage points compared to what they were saying before. And I think that that's the encouraging thing. The question now is, can we ramp up our medical care to be able to take care of people and solve it when they do get sick, so that way those people that do have these pre-existing conditions can be taken care of, and obviously we don't want them to die. Because here's the thing, when we're looking at the coronavirus, it's attacking, for the most part, particular people. The vast majority of people are going to get no symptoms or almost no symptoms, right? But it's attacking particular people that have particular diseases. And what's fascinating about that, when you start looking at the research, is that the majority of those diseases are actually self-inflicted. And I don't want to be too crass and too like anything like that. But when you look at the way that our country eats, we have a very serious problem with diabetes.
Yep.
Who are some of the worst who are some of the worst people in the sense of like that are having the worst reactions to coronavirus? People with diabetes. Same thing when it comes to lung disease. What's the majority of the way that you get lung disease? Smoking. Like you can almost take this. I'm not saying every single time, and I'm not saying every single instance, but I'm talking in generalities, right? I think that this should be a wake-up call to Americans to clean up your diet, clean up your lifestyle. Because here's the thing. If we had less people with diabetes, which the vast majority of those cases are self-induced because of poor diet, in all reality, we could probably have saved thousands and thousands of lives simply by cleaning up diet and not eating so much sugar and dairy and processed carbs. More than likely, we could have vastly eliminated so many deaths. And that's to me the frustrating part, is that it's vitally important that obviously we deal with this thing, but at the same time, it's one of those things like, it's so frustrating because we could have prevented this if we would have taken this seriously 5 years ago.
Easier to deal with if you would get the small instead of the large order of fries.
or have actual fries that are actually made out of potato. Like,
wouldn't that be something?
Yeah. It's like, like you could go to, like, for example, there's like, you could go to In-N-Out, right? You get fries. At least it's real potato. They cut there in front of you, but then they fry it in like cottonseed oil. That stuff is so toxic for you. It's so bad for you. And you're just like, okay, this is a problem here. This is a problem with our society. Like, stop putting crap in your body. And maybe we could actually beat coronavirus. Like, honestly, like when you look at the numbers, it would have been a small number of thousands of people that would have died, not 50,000 or whatever the number is we're at right now. Yeah.
And I think it is something like 50,000 maybe, actually. But again, most of it's in New York.
Yeah, that's true.
which isn't meant to be a knock on New Yorkers. That's just right. That's where the focus
also when you
is here.
Right, but also look at New York. If you look at the restaurants that are in New York, it's a lot of garbage food because everybody's so busy. They're going around. They're grabbing a slice of pizza on the fly. They're going into this quick little shop, whatever it is. Like that's. I think this is indicative of a larger problem of we don't take care of ourselves, and that's something that we really need to do.
You're absolutely right. I mean, and I hope that that's one of the good things that comes out of this is people do recognize this, and doctors kind of grow a spine again and be like, okay, look, buddy, put down the fork, put on some hiking boots, go outside, and hopefully we'll wind up being a healthier country on the back end of this. For myself, I was thinking that I was definitely entertaining the possibility that it could be, the disease itself could be very serious in terms of fatality rate at the beginning, just because I was looking at the way that China was reacting, armies of guys spraying disinfectant everywhere and all of that. And I was like, you don't do that for the flu. Unless, of course, you want to create a certain perception, which could be the possibility. But you hear the stories of them welding doors shut and everything. And don't get out. Like, ooh, you're afraid of something. You're like terrified of this. So that, led me to thinking that, maybe there's actually more to this thing than they're telling us. But then as more and more starts to come out, I'm like, at this point, I almost want there want this disease to be worse than what they're telling us? Because if it isn't, they're either A, grossly incompetent, our leaders, or B, yep, they're using this as a power grab to try to control us.
Or a combination.
I'm not a huge fan of either of those answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are no good at that. At a certain point, it became clear there were no good answers. All the potential answers were bad ones. And I'm like, oh man, the least scary, frankly, is that this thing is that the disease is worse than they're telling us. At this point, I think it's actually that China was afraid of it because they knew it came from their lab and they weren't entirely sure what it was going to do. I think honestly that's the most likely explanation for their reaction, and the fact that in most places in the world it hasn't actually been terribly deadly as of yet.
Yeah, so, yeah. I think it's a lot more contagious than we originally anticipated, and a lot less deadly.
I wonder about that though, and the reason I wonder about the contagion, I almost wonder if it's actually maybe even less contagious than we thought, because I'm sure you heard they recently did an autopsy and found out there was a COVID death back in early February over in California, which means it was flying around there since January.
Yeah.
So, and it was a community spread case. So that means it was flying around a lot back in January already, possibly even December. So that tells me it's actually had more time to spread around than we thought. So actually it wonders, like, is it actually more contagious than we thought, or is it as or possibly even less, because it's been here and spreading around a lot longer than anyone imagined.
Yeah. I see. What's interesting too? Yeah. What's interesting too is one of my friends, Patrick Wyatt, who's has got a show, the Shining Light podcast. He's a former defense contractor, and he's worked overseas and does like a lot of research and all this kind of stuff. His theory is actually a biological weapon that was developed. And primarily because, and the thing that he cites is that because it's attacking particular organs and particular diseases that most Americans are very weak in, and most people in like modern, like first world countries have struggles with, so like diabetes, cancer, immunity, like certain things like that. It's really attacking those specific organs, and that's why he's like that. It just seems like it's too perfect of a disease to be attacking the cancer, the diabetes, like literally every single thing that we self-induce onto ourselves.
That is interesting. I mean, I've heard the bioweapon theory a lot, of course, and I think a lot of people were just jumping to that, at least as a possibility, myself included, because early on, one of the things at first I was like, I wonder if there's any bioweapons facilities in Wuhan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure enough, there's like maybe 4.
Yeah. Well, and see, like that's the thing is like I always say, like, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist, but you always have to ask questions, right? And so, like, for example, like one of the things that I find fascinating, which makes me again question everything that we're hearing, is there was, remember I think it was last year, there was the big earthquake that was out here in California. And I think it happened in like Northern California. Okay. It happened in kind of like the middle of nowhere, this tiny little town, that sort of thing. But I remember like sitting here, I literally felt the earthquake just swaying back and forth for like a minute. It was so freaky. Yeah. Well, this earthquake, I looked up the epicenter of it, right? It's in the middle of nowhere. And all of a sudden you zoom in, like you could literally see on the Google Maps that here's the epicenter of the earthquake. You zoom in, it's like, oh, there's a military base right here. Let's zoom in a little bit further. Oh, that's where they do nuclear testing. Really? And then literally on the way where they do underground nuclear testing. And so then I asked my buddy who works for a local news station. He's like, oh yeah, they do underground nuclear testing, and they've actually admitted to being able to do show up as like a 1 point something earthquake. And I'm like, so if they admit that it can show up as a 1 point something earthquake, the earthquake happened on their property right in the smack dab middle of it. What's to say they couldn't do a 5-pointer or a 6-pointer if something went wrong? And then they evacuated it immediately.
All of a sudden, yeah. There's a curiosity. Is that base still evacuated?
I don't know. I'd have to check up on that.
Huh. I'd be curious to know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'll find out.
Yeah, please do. Actually, I would love to know.
But again, it comes down to question everything. It doesn't necessarily mean you jump to conclusions. It just means that seems interesting.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the Steve Day show, and their theme for the year is assume you're being lied to. Yep. Because how many times have we been lied to? And transparently lied to. Yeah. It's so transparent, it's almost not even a lie. It's like Epstein didn't kill himself. It's like, does anybody believe that he did? Come on. It's like, if you do, it's because you have something to lose. Yeah. It's like, come on. There's a sponsor you're afraid of losing if you're publicly saying that, it was probably just a don't believe it. Yeah. Anyway.
By the way, there was a great sign that I was driving down PCH one day, and there's a surf shop along the side of the road, and they say that our wetsuits don't hang themselves, and neither did Epstein.
Oh, I love it. At the very, thank goodness for the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
It's given us ways to laugh through the insanity at the very least.
Right.
So, at a bare minimum, at least that's good. So, before we go, I need you to talk about this American conservative movement thing, this new project you've got going on.
Yeah. So basically, all of this came out very quickly out of this whole coronavirus fiasco.
Okay.
And so I was talking with JD Rucker, who over at Knock Report, and we were talking, and we're like, okay, so we're literally seeing our rights being stripped away like before our eyes, and nobody seems to care. There seems to be a problem here. And so we got together with a couple other friends. One is Pastor Sam Jones, who's got a show on my podcast network. And then Ken Peters, who's the founder of the Church of Planned Parenthood up in Spokane. And we're like, okay, so why don't we start a political organization that's geared specifically towards unifying conservatives, but not even conservatives, but like constitutionalists. Like, let's educate people on this is what the Constitution says. Here's the freedoms that we're supposed to be afforded, and here's why it's so important, right? And so basically, we're running with this movement, and we're going to try to have influence kind of wherever we can. We're going to be looking for areas where we can educate, places where we can influence, kind of partner with other organizations, that sort of thing. So we put on our first online conference, I believe it was last week, and it was called the Saving America Conference. And we got together like 12 or 13 speakers. We had some great speakers. We had Michael Johns, who was the co-founder of the Tea Party. We had Mindy Robinson, who's running for Congress up in Nevada. Jerry Wayne, who's the union worker who got into it with Joe Biden
over here in Lansing. Yeah.
And then we had some great pastors like Pastor Greg Locke. We had Dr. Mike. We had a great lineup of speakers. And so one of the things that we kept getting a lot of feedback for is that nobody really actually seems to be like articulating all of these issues. Like, conservatives talk about our constitutional rights, but it's always very general. Like, I need my freedom of speech or freedom of religion, but let's get into why. Help you to understand, so that way you can go back to your friends and family and associates and people like that. And like, no, this is why we can't roll over and just like allow them to take our rights away. And so we got a lot of great response. It was a lot of fun, but I think it's something that's really needed. There's some other great organizations out there like Turning Point USA and even like there's the Daily Wire and there's some different groups that do a good job of educating. What we're looking to do specifically is kind of being like a unifying factor. Okay. So that's kind of like our mission, I think, in all of this.
Well, and I think that is incredibly necessary, especially the educating. Yeah. Because and this is usually when you usually start to get into trouble when everything that you believe in, everything is taken for granted, because you just assume that that's the way things are. You forget the why. You forget why I believe what I believe, whether that's applied to religion or whether it's applied to politics, the way to govern society. As soon as you start to forget the why, you're vulnerable. If everybody else is still taking it for granted and continuing to go the same way, you're fine for a while, but you're running on fumes, and eventually some curious individual with a little bit of rebellion in them is going to start asking, why? And if you don't have answers, that person is going to assume that you're full of it. You can only, and this is where I have an issue with the Burke and Buckley conservatives. You can't rely just on prejudice, on just this is the way things were always done.
Right.
You can't just rely on that. You have to be able to go back and take a look at why we believe the things we do. And yes, doing that is going to invite possible misinterpretation, possible perversion of those things. But here's the thing, that's already happening. If you get to the point where it's absolutely necessary, it's because people are already doing that. And the only way to fight it is to get down there in the dirt, get in the trenches, and start going back to the beginning and going, okay, this is why they believe this. This is the why behind the why. This is the context and everything. And here's how it applies today. And then you can even have a conversation where it's like, well, does that apply today?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people would, to take the Second Amendment, for example, I think it's utterly undeniable that the thing was meant for the American people to be able to have essentially the equivalent of the military so that they could, one, yes, fight off an enemy invader, but also fight off a tyrannical government on our own shores if need be.
Yeah.
Now, in a modern context, that means there's no particular reason I shouldn't be able to have an M1 Abrams tank in my backyard. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good idea.
Right.
but based on the context of the Second Amendment as originally conceived, I want to know where I can buy a tank.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. And like, that's the thing is like, I feel like we've consistently gone away from the way the founding fathers originally wanted, which was localized almost everything. The federal government was only there for particular necessities, right?
Yes.
Even when you're dealing with like the military, right?
Mm-hmm.
They originally intended it for it to be local militias. And then you would they would kind of join forces if we needed something on a federal level, right? Mm-hmm. And that was the safeguard to protect against a tyrannical federal government. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, we get rid of that, and it's all federal. There's no local. Now there's no checks and balances. Yep. And we're seeing the checks and balances being taken away consistently. And especially now with this coronavirus aspect of things, we're seeing that the local governors are giving themselves power to essentially be little kings. It's like, that's nowhere in the Constitution. That's nowhere even in the state constitution.
Nope.
So that's a serious problem. And I think that what happens is that people are just paying attention to what the media tells them, and then they just accept it at face value. So they're like, Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency, and everybody's like, oh, great, finally. Somebody's taking this seriously. It's like, well, okay, let's take a step back. Now he's giving himself the authority to make laws and enforce the laws, completely bypassing the legislative branch of the government. That's a problem. There's a reason why we set it up to where the legislature legislates, the executive branch executes.
Exactly.
Stuff here.
Yes. And now, before we go, where can somebody find out more about the American Conservative Movement?
Yeah, of course. So if you go to AmericanConservativeMovement.com, very simple, you can check that out. You can sign up for our email list and that sort of thing. We're posting some blogs and some videos, things like that. We have another online conference coming up on May 9th, which is a Saturday. It'll be another all-day event. We've got some great speakers lined up for that. I know we've got like Mindy Robinson coming back, Trevor Loudon, Jerry Wayne. We're working on a few other pretty big names as well. But that'll be on May 9th. On May 1st, coming up, we're actually going to be doing a live stream coordinating with a lot of the local rallies and protests across the country. And so what we'll be doing is we'll actually be taking Skype calls from people at a lot of these different rallies, kind of talking about like what's going on, what they're doing, things like that. But then we're also going to take that opportunity to educate people on the actual statistics about what's actually going on, as well as the actual constitutional rights that the government is overstepping. So we'll kind of take that opportunity on that day. Really, it's really dealing with like events and what's actually happening, and we're gonna have people on the ground and a lot of these rallies skyping in and talking about what's going on and that sort of thing. So those are the two things we've got coming up in the near future that we're pretty excited about.
May 1st and May 9th.
May 1st and May 9th, and those will be streaming on our Facebook page. So if you just look up American Conservative Movement on Facebook, we'll be streaming both days live right there.
Yes, exactly. Okay, great. So definitely people go check those out. And if there is a protest in your area and you were able to go. Whatever rules and everything they set up, the protesters, not the state, I don't care about them. Whatever rules that are set up by the organizers of the protest, you should probably follow those because they're set up to avoid running afoul of, frankly, the police and everything. So, go over there and behave yourselves. To not to be too blunt, don't throw the first punch.
Yeah, well, but also too is like, don't give the opposition an excuse to discredit your message.
Don't give them.
I think that's vitally important because I was having a conversation with Jerry Wayne a little bit earlier today, and we were talking about a lot of these protests that are going on, and we're both very concerned because nobody's practicing social distancing, nobody's wearing masks, everybody's just congregated together. All you're going to do is you're going to discredit your entire message. And they're just going to attack you for saying you just want to kill old people and people that are not immune to this because you're not taking the precautions. Now you could be passing it on to somebody else and that sort of thing. So I'm strongly recommending and strongly telling everybody, if you go to one of these things, do it because the government should not be telling you you can't congregate and you can't go to church and you're taking away your rights. Wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from somebody else. I strongly encourage, if the event organizers do the caravans, those are great, a great way to do social distancing, but still show up, do the gridlock, all that kind of stuff. But it's like, take proper precautions so that way you don't give, number one, you're loving your neighbor and your friends and family by caring for them and trying to avoid spreading it. But then also on the other side, you're not giving the opposition and the left and the mainstream media an opportunity to discredit your message because you weren't wearing a mask. It's just an easy thing to skip that step altogether.
Right. And yeah, don't give them ammo if you can, avoid it. But in any case, yeah. So look up locally wherever you are, whatever state you're in. Find out if there's some protests. Go to American Conservative Movement and check out what they've got going on May 1st and May 9th. And also, just keep an eye on them. Keep a huge, giant eye on these people because they're trying to get away with stuff. And I think right now they're trying to figure out how much power they can get away with keeping. Yeah. I think that's part of why. That's part of because I'll be charitable and say some of it might be legitimately concerned having to do with the virus. Fair, but I also think part of the reason why things are being rolled back very slowly is because they're trying to figure out how much they can get away with keeping.
Yeah, how little they have to give us back.
Exactly, especially when it comes to places where there's nothing actual. There is no crisis. Like again in Michigan, there's a little bit of an issue over in Detroit, but they're no close to being over. They're not even close to being overwhelmed. Yeah. In terms of the hospitals, even New York hasn't actually had the hospitals get overwhelmed, and they are by far the worst in the country. By far, it's not even close. It's like New York, and then somewhere is where whatever number 2 is. I think Detroit's, at least last I knew, was number 3. So, yeah, they're trying to. It's like you got that situation over there, and then you got other spots like within Michigan again, where you've got hospital staff getting laid off.
Yeah,
I know a doctor who works at the local hospital. He's going home early most days because there's nothing to do.
Yeah. And that's a problem. But this is also another major issue that we're having is that a lot of people need surgery right now and can't get it because of coronavirus. And then on top of that, we've got places like New York that are putting non-resuscitate, however you pronounce it. They're not going to resuscitate you. They're not going to bring you. Yes, resuscitate. They're not going to
resuscitate orders. Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem is that if you have a heart attack, you should be able to be kept alive. But they're saying no because of coronavirus, which you only have a .something% chance of dying from. But the person who actually needs life-saving medical care, they're not going to save you. That's a serious issue. I think, in my opinion, anybody dies from a heart attack in New York, sue the city.
Oh yeah. Well, don't worry. They'll just be recorded as a COVID death.
Yeah, exactly.
Seems to be kind of the way it's going. It's like, oh, he got tested. Look at that. He had coronavirus. That's convenient for us.
Yeah.
Checking that box.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm curious. Well, I just saw that Pennsylvania had to remove 200 from their COVID total because they were over-reporting. They were presuming a little presumptuously that it's like, oh yeah, you probably died of COVID.
They needed that federal funding, so they had to make it seem worse than it actually was.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on as well. It's insane. There's a lot of, and again, it's not like I would like to go visit my grandpa, but I'm not going to just at the moment, and he won't let me anyway because he's bought all the hype. But also, he is very old. He is very frail.
Yeah,
he actually, it's not a good idea to visit him during flu season anyway.
Yeah.
For exactly that
all of these things should be precautions that we're already taking. Like, you should be washing your hands for 20 seconds after you go out. Like, you should be we should probably be reconsidering shaking hands all the time. Like, there's certain things in American society that we should be considered, that we should already be doing to a certain degree. But for whatever reason now, it's like, okay, well, you're not doing that, so now we're gonna have the government enforce it. It's like, no, that's not quite how it's supposed to be. How about we just do proper hygiene?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, dude, what? Yeah, exactly. Wash your hands, you filthy animal. Jeez. What are you people talking about? So I think on that lovely note, I think we'll wrap it up unless you've got any final things you'd like to throw out there.
No, I mean that's pretty much it. I know, if anybody's interested, I have my podcast Conversations with Jeff. It's a lot of fun. Have a lot of cool people on. It's just a lot of fun conversations, that sort of thing. I've got a fascinating one actually coming next week. I believe it's. Let me see if I've got my calendar. I don't even know where it is. But okay, so next week, if you go onto my social media, you can see I've got a guy named Larry Gators coming on Wednesday, 4:00 Pacific time. I've got Larry Gators and Carl Crew coming on, and we're going to be talking secret societies. And these two guys probably know this stuff better than anybody. I don't really know it that well, but I'm fascinated by it. So I'm just going to pick their brain for probably an hour and a half and just see where the conversation goes. Now, supposedly, Larry Gators has some information that there's some secret societies involved in the whole COVID-19 fiasco. So I'm going to pick his brain on that and see where that leads.
That sounds like a good time. All right, people, get what time was that again?
That'll be 4:00 Pacific time, so 7:00 Eastern time. We'll be streaming live on Facebook.
Did you say that's tomorrow?
No, that'll be coming up on Wednesday.
Also, Wednesday, 4 p.m. Pacific.
Yep.
Go get your tinfoil hat good and warmed up.
Exactly.
I'm not gonna lie, I've had my tinfoil hat on a couple of times with this whole thing anyway, and it's gotten a little warm. And so go check that out. And
last time I had Larry on, we were supposed to talk about Black liberation theology, and we ended up going for 2 hours just following rabbit trails, and it was fascinating the entire time. Probably could have gone 4 hours and wouldn't have run out of anything to talk about. So it'll be fascinating.
Awesome. All right. Well, definitely check that out, people. And of course, be here next week at 9 p.m. Eastern for whatever it is we're talking about. It might be a little more Corona, might take a break from it. We'll find out. I'll let you know. So until then, check out the American Conservative Movement. Check out your protests. Keep an eye on your government, just like Thomas Jefferson said. And until next time, keep fighting.